So good morning to everyone. We are happy that you could join us. Thank you for watching this presentation. It feels a bit awkward for me personally to sit and do it online without seeing your faces, because it's very difficult to get any feedback. But I hope to make it interesting for all of us that you use the private chat function, comment section to ask questions that we can answer as we go along in this presentation. So we're going to talk maybe for around half an hour regarding polished concrete and grinding overall. And you're welcome. Please share your thoughts. Let us know what you think and the questions that you have. So I'm now going to share my screen, and Sarah is going to bring it up for you to see live, and then we can get going. I hope everyone is able to see what I'm sharing. It should say Husqvarna Superfloor Polished Concrete on your screens. First of all, a very short presentation regarding myself. My name is Andreas, and I'm the sales manager for Sub-Saharan Africa, actually, regarding grinding machinery from Husqvarna. My history is that I started 21 years ago with a company called HGC, which was the biggest company with regards to grinding machines in the world. And from there, I've been in the workshop doing everything basically that you can do for a company, but ended up in Africa still selling the same equipment. So we're going to talk about polished concrete. Now, you will see that it says Husqvarna Superfloor before, but I will also try to explain why we have a name on it and the reasoning behind having a system for polished concrete. I'm sure for those who listen, there might be different experiences when it comes to using polished concrete. So let's see if we can answer some of your questions, and also if we can give you some new knowledge. I've chosen this picture to try to communicate what I personally think about concrete. And it's on the theme of superpowers. We call it Superfloor, of course. So we're talking about bringing out the superpowers of your actual concrete floor, because as you might know, I dare to say almost every building contains a concrete floor, no matter if we cover it, if we use it as it is, rough concrete, power floated concrete, whatever it might be, we still have concrete somewhere in the building process. So we're going to show, or I'm going to show, what you can do with that actual concrete that you already have to bring out the technical aspects, to bring out the good, fantastic qualities that you can from such a material. First of all, I want to ask the question, what is polished concrete? And the reason for this question is that polished concrete as a term and as a saying has been abused a little bit. We basically call anything polished concrete as long as we do something with the concrete. So I just want to define it first in the first 3 slides so that we know what I'm going to talk about afterwards. One of the polished concretes that is mentioned is what I define as topical polished concrete. It can contain a little bit of grinding and honing, which is basically taking away scratches, and afterwards a coating will be applied. You see that in the bigger picture on top, and it sort of explains that you reach the shine on your floor by covering it with a sealer, and not only a sealer but a topical sealer like an epoxy, polyurethane, and there are other types as well. For those who don't know grinding, what it means is basically that we have a grinding machine, and that's my business, what I do. And underneath the machine, you have diamond tools. And those diamond tools comes with diamonds inside a metal carrier, and they come at different sizes. And the first steps we call grinding. And here we use a concept of grit size of the diamonds. So they're quite big diamonds. Basically, the lower the number, so we normally would use 16 to 25 grit on the first grinding step. Maybe a little bit rougher if there's something covering the surface concrete we're going to grind afterwards. That means that there is 16 or 25 of those small diamonds being able to fit into a small square. That's how they measure it. So the higher the number, the smaller the diamonds. It's actually exactly as if you used sandpaper on a piece of wood. So what we do, if we use topical polished concrete, is that we grind the concrete flat. We expose a little bit of stones that is inside the concrete already. And afterwards, just like with sandpaper, we would grind, or rather sand off, whatever we call it, a little bit of more material so that scratches from the first steps are not visible. But we don't create, as you see on the honing picture in the middle of the presentation, we do not create a surface that has any shine. That comes with the coating, which is the third picture. That's the first type of what many call polished concrete. Let's call it topical polished concrete for now. The second one is burnished polished concrete. I would say we might be more familiar with the term steel troweled, power floated concrete, and we float it to via troweling, as you see in the bottom left corner, until it goes black and creates a hard surface, and then we burnish that top, often with a sealer on top as well. That's burnished polished concrete. Here you will see that there's a reflection, but uneven reflection on the floor. And the reason for that is that we haven't leveled the floor really. We only burnished the top, so there will be a lot of unevenness on the floor as such. Then we have the third, which is what I'm going to concentrate on, which is the mechanically polished concrete. In this, we do exactly as with the topical polished concrete. We grind down to a level surface, as you can see. I'm trying to illustrate on the picture. And then we take it up with finer and finer diamond steps until polishing. So with polishing, it's still diamonds, but because of the very fine diamonds, we are removing all the scratches, which creates a reflection on your floor. If you remember from physics, when you went to school, you might remember that. I clearly remember from the school book where you have a light on one side, and the light reflects on the surface perfectly at an angle, and that shows that the floor is completely flat and reflect the light. And that's what we're trying to do with concrete, because it's hard enough for us to be able to reflect the light without actually filling it with a topical sealer that we did in the beginning to get the shine. And therefore we call it polishing when it comes to still diamond tools, but a plastic carrier that you can see in the bottom right corner. So the way we do this, or what this leads to in terms of gloss. Gloss, just to explain the concept, is that you measure reflection on the surface, as I explained just now. So the gloss and shine on the floor, what your eyes can see, is very similar. But there are different, or rather, the results are different because of how you do it. Topical polished concrete, troweled, burnished polished concrete, and mechanically polished concrete. So the mechanically polished concrete that we are focusing on at this stage, we try to define it as a step-by-step mechanically refined concrete surface through grinding and polishing. This step is, or rather this picture is slightly misleading because it looks like we are removing a lot of material all the way down to the last piece, which is where you can see a little bit of stone at the end and with a reflection on it, which we'll see on the following pictures. But the truth is that 60% of the work is done with the first diamond step. In total, under the grinding machine, we would use 7 steps. And the secret to any mechanically polished concrete is that the first step is done right, because that's when you take off all unevenness. That's also when you expose stones to your liking, so that you have a floor that looks as you would like it to look. Now, the first step, we remove between 3 and 5 millimeters of concrete in total to accomplish in normal circumstances. Of course, this depends on if the floor is very uneven. In some areas, more will be removed. But in this instance, a normal polished concrete would require 3 to 5 millimeters of removal to get down to stones and aggregates, enough to have a aesthetically pleasing result as well. Now, there are, to be successful in doing this, there are some requirements on your concrete, there's some requirements on your process that you grind with, and there are some knowledge included as well. The concrete, if we start with the basics, is that the concrete will reflect in the result. So if you have placed a concrete floor and the concrete floor is looking all right, well, I still have some demands on it before we can polish it. One, it needs to be hard enough. And the rule of thumb is that it needs to be above 20 MPa in strength. So if you go to a ready-mix company and you order above 25 MPa in strength, my goal is a 30 MPa strength, because that's the quality good enough to polish and it's easy enough to grind and polish for us. So if you're going to do a polished concrete, if you can spec it 30 MPa from your ready-mix companies, that would be great. After that comes the placing of the concrete, and I'm not claiming to be a concrete specialist when it comes to placing, but everything we do when it comes to concrete placing will be seen when we polish it. So let's say now we place the concrete, and then afterwards someone walks on it, and we just take a trowel and trowel it over to pull up fines to cover that. The footprint will be seen in your concrete. Or let's say we use a straight edge when we place it, and now we have to, because we left it a little bit too long, we have to really hit it down to get the levels right. Well, often we can see where the straight edge marks have been used, because we basically push down the aggregates or the stones in your concrete, and we pull up fines to the surface. Just some things to think about. So for a polished, mechanically polished floor, we want to have a floor that's as flat as possible, with a strength of around 30 MPa. Many ask me about power floating of the floor, and if it's necessary. Well, I would recommend the basic power floating and just a quick walkover, only to level the floor even more before we start grinding and polishing. That will save time in the grinding process. So now we go to the grinding. We have done the first step, which is basically grinding it down to a level and exposing the stones so that we are happy. After that, all the other steps, so I said around 7 to 9 steps, depending on which system we use, well, then all the next following steps will only be there to remove scratches from the previous step. So like sandpaper, if we've done the first step properly, we would then go finer and finer sandpapers up to a level where we're happy. And on diamonds, we go all the way up to 3,000 grit. I don't think you've ever seen a sandpaper that fine, but that's how far we go to get this mechanical polish on your concrete. Now, if you have ever used sandpaper, I take that as an example once again, and you have used that on wood, you know that if it's a hard wood and you would decide to jump a couple of steps, so if we talk about grit, you would go from a 40 grit sandpaper to 100 grit sandpaper. What happens then is that you will leave some of the scratches on your surface. And that's why we have to do so many steps as we grind and polish a concrete floor. So if you see in a scratched concrete polished concrete floor, then you would probably know why it's happened. They might have jumped steps or done something else wrong. So a super floor, a mechanically polished concrete, really lives up to these words. It's economical because you use the concrete that's already there. We can talk a little bit more about pricing a little bit later. It's ecological. It's good for the environment, simply because we'll look closer at that as well, but you don't use anything on top that requires any production or anything like that. And quality, ergonomics, well, ergonomics has more to do for the ones performing it, but it also reduces sound levels with actually, although using concrete, and it has other qualities like that we will look at. Remember, nothing can be harder that you just put on top of the concrete than the concrete itself. So this is just to illustrate in the environmental debate on how it can look when we produce a normal floor. It produces a lot of carbon monoxide, producing a floor, placing it, everything like that. Well, we actually only use the concrete when we do a polished concrete floor. We use machinery, of course, and some electricity, but it's minimal compared to other production lines. When we talk about polished concrete, mechanically polished concrete, we also can talk about doing it in different ways, different concepts. When this was discovered by HTC, which was later bought by Husqvarna, HTC they did a trial on concrete and how to grind it, and this was done in mid-90s somewhere. At that point, we only had what's called a platinum solution. We grind down to the aggregates, and we take it all the way up to a very high shine. But then different demands came to be able to use it in different environments. So, for example, the bronze concept came from a store. It was a very nice concept store. It was clothing, but a very high-end brand in Stockholm, in Sweden. They wanted it a little bit patchier, so then they did the bronze concept, which is basically a very hard power-floated surface that you then just polish with the last few diamond steps to get a shine on the surface. It's a little bit matter than the platinum, but it's still, and it has no exposed aggregates at all. Then America, they requested that basically no stones might be seen, and they didn't want to grind as far. So then the gold concept was created, which is still a very high shine, which they wanted, but they didn't grind down into the floor as much. Well, the requirements of this is higher when you place the floor, because to be able to do the gold concept, it has to be very flat to not expose bigger aggregates in the floor. Then the silver came because someone wanted to use it outdoors, and you know that any shiny surface becomes slippery. So here in South Africa, for example, around pools, the silver concept is more used because here we grind down to the stones, but then we don't take it up to high shine, which makes it less slippery. So I have Lisette in the background helping me with some of the questions that you send in, and I'm really appreciative. Thank you. It says, how does the level accuracy of the floor affect the finished polished floor? Well, the levels are important. Not the long waviness won't affect it as much. That's more than to do with how you want the floor to look. But we can grind it flat at any point, but the more level it is from the beginning, the easier it is to get a good result on the finished floor level. The other reason is also that we need a flatter floor, or want a flatter floor, is because where we have to grind down a lot, let's say it's bumps in the floor, we will expose much more stone in that area because the stones will be higher up than the other parts of the floor. So if you want to do it cost effective, then it's important that we have levels that are good. When it comes to other levels accuracy, it doesn't affect it that much. Remember, this is on short spans. The machines are between 500 millimeters and up to 1.5 meter wide. And as the floor grinds it makes it flat wherever it goes. But the flatter the floor, the better results we can achieve. I hope that answered that question. Let's go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the platinum concept. I already explained it, but as you can see, it gives a high shine on it with the stones exposed on the floor. This is also technically the best flooring solution for any industrial. It might be strange to say that, but because of its gloss and because of its flatness, it's actually technically the best floor for any industrial use, any warehousing, any supermarket, anything like that. We'll go into a little bit more on why in a short while. So on the gold surface, you'll see that normally only 1 millimeter of the surface is grinded away. Only the finer sand particles are exposed, and we still have a glossy, shiny surface that we use. Still very easy to clean and smooth, but as I said, it requires a higher standard of placing the concrete. The silver concept is used for outdoor areas, indoor as well. When they don't want a shiny floor, we still expose the larger stone that are in the concrete in South Africa, mainly 13 or 19 mil stones that is used, 19 more usual. But it gives a matte and smooth surface, and it's also liked by many. Okay, so I got 2 more questions. We got one that says, how advisable is it to use this finish in highly infectious environments like clinics and hospitals? Can I answer that in just 2 minutes? Because we're going to go through the technical aspects of it. So I'll leave that question a little bit. I'll keep it there. And the second one is, how easy is it to install this finish on existing floors? Very good question. When it comes to new floors, then you can decide on your strength of your concrete, how it's placed. But worldwide, I would say that 70% of the floors are older floors where it's done. So yes, no problems, but it would have to be tested so the strength of the concrete is good enough. And we can't then also influence the final result as much as with a new floor, because on a new floor, you can decide what stones you have, you can decide the colors, anything. Next question is a double garage too small for a superfloor? No. Before I moved to South Africa, I did both my dad's garage and my father-in-law's garage. No problem at all. It can be done by removing existing floors, but once again, often when we build a house, we have the concrete and then a screed and then tiles or whatever is there. Now, to be able to do it, we need the actual concrete to be above 25 MPa. So that's the only limitation. Yes, we can remove existing floors. Minimum MPa, as I said, is 25 MPa, but I prefer 30 MPa. And next question, how soon can you start grinding after concrete has been cast? I love it. Thank you very much for all your questions. You can start grinding on a 30 MPa floor, because remember, I need the 25 MPa in strength when I polish it. So we can go on quite early with the first stages after, I would say, 5 to 7 days, depending on if it's a 30 MPa, but we can only polish it when it reaches 25 MPa, which is around 12 to 14 days after casting in that case. Is there any additives that's added on aggregate during concrete mixing? No. My favorite is to use a normal 30 MPa concrete and then to grind it. And then the next question, other than inconsistent batch mixing, what other factors can contribute to inconsistent aggregate exposure after grinding and polishing? Yes, there are actually quite a few things that can affect inconsistent exposure. But I want to highlight something here when it comes to especially architects and to those doing floors. I would like to compare polished concrete and concrete in itself to marble or to granite. If you go to the airport in Johannesburg at international departure, you've got granite tiles there, and you will see in different areas there are different grains, there are different amount of other stones inside the granite. That's how it's built up. You will see patterns in the floor. It's a living floor in that sense. Polished concrete or concrete is also the same. Polished concrete is not a material where you can count the amount of stones in a square and say that I want the exact amount of stones that I have in this square over there. That does not work. So inconsistent polishing or inconsistent exposure can also be because of, as I mentioned in the beginning, when we place the concrete and we push stones down in various ways. Over vibrating can also cause the stones, the heavier item, to go further down. What is the best way to level a sloping bare concrete existing building? Well, we can always grind it for you. It depends on the slope, how well we can grind it, but it shouldn't be a problem. Maybe afterwards we can have a talk about it, or you can contact me, because I need a little bit more information to answer that. But normally we can grind it, no problems. So moving on to the bronze concept, you will see that's a supermarket in the States. Just polishing steps, no aggregate exposure. It's the troweled surface that you see. We don't remove the concrete skin that we normally do, but it gives a smooth, patchy but glossy surface. This is a very well done floor. I would say it's not a representative example of the bronze concept, but of course we want to show it as nice as possible, but it requires some skill and some work to be able to accomplish this. On this slide, I want to talk a little bit on where we can use it. And here it talks about areas of application. We can use it for both new and old concrete. Doesn't matter, as long as the MPA is hard enough. The industrial use, workshops, warehouses, public spaces, shop, domestic environments. This covers basically everything, right? So when we go through the technical aspects now on the floor, I would like to highlight why it's used in certain areas and why it's not used in certain areas. So let's just get into it and have a look. Sorry, this is the grinders that we use. Of course, I need to show polished concrete machines, concrete grinders, and we use vacuums to take all the dust away. So what we do is, and the technical aspects, is that the life cycle cost is very low, 40% lower. That's what they calculated. It can be used on any floor, concrete floor. It's entirely dry without any sludge or water. You have an evenness, which means low vibrations on your forklifts, very little environmental impact, and it's easy to maintain. So let's look at the finances first, and the economical part. Remember that we are using the concrete that you already have there. So it's a very cost-effective, both short-term and long-term application. Basically, cost-wise, on a little bit of larger areas, we would be able to beat most flooring alternatives, except for if you just power trowel the floor, of course, of the concrete. So there's a low square meter cost. If you want to know more, please contact me. I'll be happy to answer all of it. The grinding, as I said, can begin after just 5 to 7 days after casting, and you can work while other tradespeople are working in the building. And the floor, by just cleaning it, not maintenance, but only cleaning it in the right way, can be kept in the same nice manner as we have from the beginning. When we look at sustainable, we talked about the environment before. This is just to illustrate that the electric use that we have, it's very little that we use to be able to create polished concrete compared to other materials that are placed on the floor. The concrete will always be there anyway. It's natural components inside. It's stone, sand, water, and cement. Chemically free. We can use chemicals to seal it afterwards, but you can also do it without. This is a very important factor. The concrete is always there. Remember that. We have an unlimited service life of a concrete, actually. So it's not like a tile that can break. The concrete will still be there. And therefore, it can also be used for very tough treatment areas. For example, we have done military bandwagon parking hangars in Sweden. We have done high traffic area like forklift manufacturing companies. Toyota, for example, was one of the first one in Sweden that in polished concrete. They did, I think, 70,000 squares that they did. And because it's concrete, it's stone and sand, and it's very strong, as long as you have a good quality concrete. Clean it right, then you've done your maintenance as well. The wear resistance is also very good. If you compare to an untreated concrete of the same quality and you make a polished concrete super 4 of it, it says 170% higher resistance, but it's just a percentage. But because we take away that top cement layer and we grind down to the stones and we create a stronger surface than before. Sorry, I got another question. What is the optimum depth at which a floor will be planed, cut to finish? So normally 3 to 5 millimeters is what we take off when the floor. This is all depending on if the concrete is straight from the beginning, then it's 3 to 5 millimeters that we take off. So I haven't forgotten about the infectious environments. I'll get to that just now. So another question we often get is, how does it do with slipperiness? It looks so slippery. And this I often get when I go and do demos to people, when I show them on their concrete floor what it will look like. And I first want to start off by saying, yes, any surface that is shiny will be slippery when you have water on it. But I don't know if any one of you are interested in Formula One and you watch the race cars go around the track, you know that when it's dry outside, when they don't have any rain, they use slicks. They use tires with very little tread on because they get a very good grip on that surface. But if it starts raining, they quickly have to go and change tires. So therefore, if we look at polished concrete as well as any shiny epoxy, any tile that's shiny, anything with a hard, even surface, with water, the slip resistance goes down, as you can see on the blue columns at the middle of the screen there. On a dry floor, we have a very good slip resistance comparing to basically any material. So very high ratings on that, as well as on fire safety, of course, it doesn't burn. If you don't know what ESD is, I didn't know this a few years ago. ESD means that it's electrostatic discharge. This is important for the electronic industry, for example. If you walk on a floor and you touch someone and you know that spike you give someone, that little thing that happens, that's ESD. And that's very damaging to any electronic industry. So it's a flat, natural floor that doesn't produce any dust. Just to give you an example of that, we did a bottling store for soft drinks manufacturing. And they always had problems because they had dusty bottles that came from the warehouse because all the forklifts were pulling up dust from the floor when they didn't have they didn't treat it in various ways. So they had a cleaning station for all the bottles going out. They chose to do polished concrete like this because it didn't release any dust at all on their bottles, and they could send it straight to the stores. Then I get please discuss remedies for improperly polished and non-level finished floors. So improperly polished, well, then it has to be repolished. If a floor has been done to a polished concrete, but it's improperly polished, then you would have to go back to step one because, as I said from the beginning, step one is the only step that actually affects your final finish. If you do all the others and haven't done your first step right, then it doesn't work very well. Non-level finished floors. Well, non-level would have to be leveled in various ways, either by grinding or in placing a new surface on it. It depends on how unlevel it is. It's very difficult to answer. When we do this, of course, another question is, which came on now, how close to corners can the polishers get? Well, the grinding machines in themselves, they get to around 10 millimeters from the edge. So therefore, we have various edge grinding equipment, all from a handheld little polisher to walk behind machines that can do that. So yes, we can get the same finish all the way into the corners. How do you avoid pinholes or cavities, which might only be visible once polishing is completed? Well, first of all, we can affect some of it to avoid pinholes by doing it as we're placing it. But if we don't have no control over that, then we have remedies such as we call it a pore filler. It's basically like sorry, I lost the word. It's a chemical or a material you put in front of your machine when you're grinding, and it mixes with the dust from the floor, and that fills smaller pinholes and cracks, things like that, just by mixing, and it fills it. And then if it's bigger cavities, if it's bigger holes, then I think they failed somewhere in the casting, and that would then be then we would mix something that we would patch that hole. But it will always be visible in that case, simply because there will be no stones, and the color will be slightly off from the main floor. But it can be fixed. Just to show you a little bit of environments where we done polished concrete, and some of the pitfalls or some of the downfalls with using concrete as well as we go through this. And thank you very much for all the questions. I really appreciate it. It makes the presentation more interesting and easier for me to hold. This is, if I remember right, this is from Dubai, where they did a parking garage up to a very high shine. As you can see, we can make lines on it, no problem. But you have to remember that polished concrete is also stellar concrete. So if you have, from the cars, for example, you have oil dripping and things, if you leave it there, it will stain the concrete. And therefore, at this occasion, they have put on something called a stain protection, or a sealer that protects your concrete from the oil penetrating into it. It can be done, but it requires some thinking. If we look at any food environment, then you know that fruit contains acids and sugar, and concrete doesn't like either of them. So in a section like this, where I can expect to have a spill of things like that, they have a good cleaning regimen, so they keep it clean, but they would also put a penetrating sealer on that just gives it a longer window before it stains your floor. So then I'm getting a question. There's a wavy polished floor in a passage. Wavy, I'm guessing that means longer waviness. Cutting down might create a physical step, or would you cut to slope to remedy? I would cut down the high spot and grind more on the higher, on the waviness, but I need to see it to be able to advise how it can be remedied completely. I would not create a physical step. I would rather slope it in that case. But that's me, and it depends on the site. Can a self-leveling concrete product fix an uneven floor? Yes, it can, but you cannot polish self-leveling concrete products because it does, first of all, the NPA, it's not good enough. And a self-leveling concrete, if it's the thinner one, like a screed you're thinking of, that's what I'm thinking of when I see this. But otherwise, a self-leveling concrete, of course, if you use that, it can be used. But self-leveling concretes have some drawbacks. And one of them is that because it's so pumpable and flows so easy, the stones, aggregates, normally go further down into your concrete. If it's a self-leveling screed we're talking about, then no, we cannot polish it under normal circumstances. Can you produce and distribute a simplified list of specifications for our architects? Yes, I can. Please contact me. I do have specifications more or less, and we can go into more what you need. So no problems at all. When it comes to the industry, what do you want for any production area? Well, you want a floor that's easy to maintain and clean. You want it to not be dusty as well. And you want a good working environment. if we look at Toyota that I mentioned earlier, the reason for them going from epoxy flooring to a polished concrete floor was simply because they had to repair the epoxy too often. So they now wanted something that could last much longer. When doing so, they also realized, the MD of the company, he often gives tours in the factory. And he said before, when the floor was dirty, if they spilled coffee, the workers on the floor, they just left it there. Well, now in the case of a polished concrete floor, they actually go and clean up after themselves because they like their workspace to be clean. So it had positive effects on the working environment. It lowered sounds because of less vibrations. To give you one more example, Audi in Germany, they did 60,000 square meters of polished concrete because before, when they were driving with forklifts, they had a problem with wheel axles making a lot of noise as they were transporting them. By grinding it, they improved the work environment a lot, as well as reduced problems on the forklift with transmissions, bearings because of unevenness. So they saved costs as well. When we're talking about, I'm asked about specifications for a penetrating sealer. Well, there are a few on the markets that are penetrating. The most important thing is that I think for a mechanically polished floor, that they mustn't leave a residue on the top and must react chemically with your floor. And those that do that are normally of good quality. We have products that do this, and I'm sure other companies also have them. I just want to show, let's see, I didn't have the picture here that I thought. One of the pictures that we had at the beginning, let me just find it here. There we go. So, okay, I just want to show, because we had a question of before, I'm just going to find it. How advisable is it to use finish in a highly infectious environment like clinics or hospitals? So, to answer your question, polished concrete is used in hospitals around the world, but normally not where you do the operations, in the theaters. And the reason for that is that you need to seal it properly against the infections like you're talking about. More important in those cases as well, and one of the problems that was found out, because in hospitals and infectious areas, a lot of vinyl is used. And what the researchers came up with is that when they used cleaning chemicals, a lot of the bacteria is actually eating of the cleaning chemicals. So it helps first, and then the bacteria goes up again. So mechanical cleaning, even on vinyl, would improve those areas. Where we have used polished concrete in hospitals is mainly in lecture halls, all the corridors and things like that, but not in the actual infectious areas. It still is a concrete as such. So it all depends on what you compare to. When we talk about cleaning of the vinyl, then I would recommend a diamond impregnated pad with only water. We call it Twister that we have, and that cleans the floor mechanically, and that reduces bacteria in infectious levels a lot as you clean the floor. Let's go to the last question. So public spaces, of course, in public spaces there it depends a lot what requirements you have. In this museum, they wanted to have a nice shine to show off the flight and the planes, as well as a good resistance against traffic, foot traffic in this case. And from the pictures, you can see, I think I took this picture myself, you can actually see that it lives up to both. When it comes to other environments, let's say you want to do it in a home, like I showed you Isa earlier, then in a home, it's more down to what you as a person like, or maybe what your wife likes in terms of aesthetics. There, the technical aspects are not as important as it would be in an environment like this. Imagine a factory like this that can move anything at any time. They always have their floor. Their floor will never be destroyed. It can always be, when cleaned in the right way, it can be kept to the same shine. And it can also always be remedied to get back to the shine in case of factories or not being managed properly and things like that. Did I answer all the questions? I think so, all the questions that I got so far. So at this stage, I want to say thank you. If you have more questions, you're welcome to ask them now. We're going to stop that presentation. You are welcome to ask me in the chat box there, but also I'm on here, so you can contact me at any time through the expo.
Thank you so much, Andreas. That was really, really informative. And for someone who is interested in all of these things, I now all of a sudden want to do my garage floor. It's so good. I'm just waiting to see if there are any more questions in the box. I see that this Skulk Pinau has given us his contact details for him to get in touch with you guys. And Lizette has posted your details, so all the attendees can get in touch with you.
And thank you everyone for asking questions.
Yes,
it makes it much easier to give a presentation. Normally, when you give a presentation, you are able to see people and see how they react. Now it's more difficult.
Yes, I must say this is has been one of the more interactive sessions, so that has been fantastic. So I think there doesn't seem to be any more questions coming, but a whole lot of thank yous. So thank you, Andreas, for your presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and to our sponsors, PMSA. And we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Bye.
Bye.